So Joshua Hatton, thank you for coming along here. Lots of different things that we want to talk to you about for sure. So just kind of a brief introduction. I'll see if I remember all of your titles and you can correct me. So you're
Got to get them
you're
all.
there it is. Catch them all. So you're co-owner of Single Cask Nation, independent bottling company.
Correct.
Um, and then Impex Beverages, which is an importer. You're now the national something or other.
National sales director.
Okay, that's right. That
Yeah,
sounds very official.
yeah.
And you are also a keeper of the Quake, which is kind of a different thing.
I am a keeper of the Quake.
Not
That is
necessarily
correct.
a job title, but I want to hear all about how one keeps a Quake at some point during this conversation.
I'm glad you pronounced it properly and didn't say like quiche.
The Quake,
Looks
yeah,
like,
yeah.
right?
You could do that too. You could keep quiche too, and be a keeper of the
Mm,
Quake. You could keep quiche in a Quake, and then you're really doing it.
the world's your oyster.
Yeah. So so let's we can start with Single Cast Nation, I guess, because that's kind of your baby. And it's
Hmm.
something the store I'm at Roma Wines here, we're about to bring in a bunch of the stuff that you did from your last retail outturn, but you kind of started more as almost a private club, like you had to have a membership and everything to get bottles from
Yeah,
it.
correct.
So if you could
Yeah,
just give a little history on Single Cast Nation there.
sure. So we started. We officially launched in 2011, though the idea was hatched in 2010 between myself and my business partner Jason Johnston Yellen. We launched the company in 2011 selling memberships, and the idea was you buy a membership, you become a member of Single Cask Nation, and then you gain access to all of the whiskeys that we bottle. I mean, to be very honest with you, it was not the most inventive platform, because the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society had been doing it successful for about 30 years before us. Right, you buy a membership and then you have access to all of their whiskeys. Ours was a little bit different in that we offered three levels of membership, and dependent on the level, with that membership you'd get one, two, or three bottles of your choosing, and then access to anything else that we've bottled. It's just like different dollar amounts equals different number of bottles you get, and so on. And we did the membership platform, I want to say, up until 2017. So we'd been slowly growing and growing. And it was in 2017 where we decided to launch a retail range that would go, you know, that would be in partnership to our online bottlings. So we would bottle whiskeys only for retail and then bottle whiskeys only for online. And we wanted to, at the same time, just completely remove any barrier to entry when we did this. So once we launched the retail range, we actually got rid of any membership fees. You just had to go to our website and sign up for an account, and then you had access to our whiskeys. And the other change to it that I do want to point out is that our online is, we now call that our special projects division. So we may have some distillery direct relationships. I'll give you an example. Wild Turkey is a good example, right? Where they only sell to one independent bottler. That's us. The way the contract goes is we just can't sell on retail shelves. It's got to be sold online. They didn't want us competing with their own Wild Turkeys on your shelves or on anyone else's
Sure.
shelves, right? So we have to sell that online only. That's a special project. And then sometimes we'll do, uh, we'll create a whiskey, or we'll work on a whiskey that the story is so big that even a retailer as good as yourself would not have the stamina to tell the story, and your prospective customer would probably fall asleep before they purchase the bottle. But it's uh, as an example, we're working with Catoctin Creek, where we purchased two of their casks,
I am
married them
so
together, and put them in. Oh, are we
uh,
frozen?
Just a little. You're still coming through with the audio, okay? I think the computer is as excited as I am about this Kilhoman cask because this is super exciting. And I think we're okay as long as the audio keeps going. I'm happy.
Yeah,
But
you're
so
good. Okay.
yeah, I think we're all right. So this, yeah, I remember hearing
Okay.
about this. This was two smaller casks um of Catoctin Creek that they didn't make any cuts on that you then put into a Kilhoman barrel.
Yeah. Yeah. So they actually had, and geez, his last name is escaping me, but there's a gentleman, Larry, insert last name here. He's actually the guy who came up with the 95.5 rye mash bill for MGP.
Sure.
And
Yeah. Okay.
he went to Catoctin Creek to basically, do some consulting work for them. And at MGP, they're not doing any cuts, right? It's straight continuous distillation. But in Catoctin Creek, they don't do continuous distillation, but they modified their process to create a no cuts rye that matured in casks for 3 or 4 years, and then we put it into a ex Kilhoman cask that also previously held PX sherry. So you can see I'm going on with this story, and it's way too big a story to tell anyone in a retail shop where you just have a few minutes. But online, we can go over the whole thing. And if you have interest in it, dig as deep as you can, because we'll be fully transparent. We're going to give you all the information you need. And that's why it's just the special projects,
That
right?
makes
The special
sense.
projects division.
Well, and then the other thing that I neglected to mention in your string of titles is you and Jason also host a podcast. So you have this kind of interesting platform where you can spend 45 minutes, an hour telling that story if you want to, which is very
Well,
handy, I
yeah.
would
So
imagine.
the podcast is called One Nation Under Whiskey, and the episodes go anywhere from, well, they started off being 45 minutes, and now they go anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours. That is, except of course our most recent episode that was 2 hours and 55 minutes. But that's because we interviewed 5 different people, to a distiller, an independent bottler. We interviewed Holly Sidewand to
Interesting.
discuss brand ambassador stuff. Like, we wanted to talk with different people from different walks within the whiskey industry to figure out how COVID has affected their lives in their whiskey world. And so that was a big episode. And so, yeah, it's they can be long, but they're fun. We try to make them like the car talk of whiskey podcasts,
Oh
where
man,
you could
I,
just have fun. Even if you're not into whiskey, you'll still have fun.
that's so funny because I've never. I mean, I don't own a car right now, but I always loved car talk, and I never made that connection. But that's you are the whiskey click and clack for sure. Like, man, I like you guys even more now. That's cool. Um, so and then the other thing that you're doing somehow while you're doing all of that, and you have a family and a cat, at least one cat. I know that you have
3 cats, yeah.
3 cats. Good God. Okay. So what was the first of these things that, I mean, obviously you had to start Single Cast Nation before you started. The podcast is like 3 years old or so, but then you were also working at Impex. What came first?
The cats,
The
probably.
cats were
No.
sure.
um, so Single Cast Nation came first.
Okay.
Jason and I were bloggers, whiskey bloggers way back in a time when there really weren't many whiskey bloggers, and sort of the mid to later aughts. And we we were getting so many to our website daily, anywhere between say 1,000 to 1,500 people to our website on any given day, which is a fair number of people, at least back then. I don't know what numbers look like these days for blogs, because I just don't look at those things. But it was so much so where we thought that um, if people were coming to us to make buying decisions based on what we thought about other people's whiskeys,
Hmm.
what if they came to us to make buying decisions based on the whiskeys that we picked? Because the only whiskeys we're going to pick are whiskeys that we absolutely fall head over heels for, that we just want to drink any day, every day, all day. Whiskeys that would truly, truly make us proud. And so that was the idea behind it back in 2010. So that was 2010. I started with the idea was 2010. The business launched in 2011. I started with Impex in 2015. However, Impex has always been the importer of Single Cask Nation, so we'd been close to them for years, and I loved my old job, but I was looking for a wholesale change into the whiskey world. From I used to be in industrial storage product sales, and it's not as
That sounds
sexy.
terribly interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And then the podcast, we're in our fourth season now. So we got into our fourth season in February. So we're about 3.5 years in.
Hmm. Yeah, for some reason I had always assumed that you did Impex first, and then it made sense to start an independent bottling company because you had the connection to Impex, but it was really Single Cask Nation that started first.
Yeah, just
Yeah,
always think about it backwards.
sure.
That's how we did it.
So and so you were just kind of doing whiskey as like your hobby, sort of, that the blog was more of kind of a hobby thing while you were working in this industrial storage field, it was?
Yeah, it was very much a hobby. Just it was very much just an enthusiast's thing, and then I was just blogging as an enthusiast, but got incredibly serious about it. I'm the type of personality that anything that I'm really into, I kind of go whole hog. And so, there was a time when I was collecting far too many guitars and far too many comic books and guitar pedals. And I can't tell you how many pairs of Vans I own right now, but it's a whole heck of a lot.
Can add shoe store to the
So
list
yeah,
of
I kind of
things
just
here.
get into things and go hog wild with them.
Nice. I'm assuming that you didn't. I mean, going into industrial storage or whatever was not necessarily the first. Like, what did you want to do when you grew up, when you were a kid? It probably wasn't become a whiskey independent bottler, if you even knew what that was when you were little 15, 12-year-old Joshua Hatton or whatever it would be. So what was like the first thing you
Yeah.
remember wanting to be when you grew up?
When I was 6 years old, I wanted to be a rock star.
Yeah.
And I kept that dream alive until May of 2011.
Okay. What happened in May of 2011? Just the
Single Cask Nation officially incorporated, and my wife had told me, we had a heart to heart about this because I was married, I had 2 kids, I had 4 cats at the time, I had a job that had me traveling quite a lot, and I was in a full-time, very serious band, and I started a whiskey company. And as serious as the band was, and as fun as the band was, and as passionate as I am about making music, it was just this opportunity to take this new path in life that I felt I really wanted to take. So I let my bandmates know that I was hanging up my bass guitar, and I was picking up some bottles of whiskey.
huh. What was the band called?
That band was called Kimono, like a kimono,
Sure.
and Dragon, like a drag queen.
Oh man.
Kimono
Okay.
Dragon,
Yeah.
and it was a play off of. They're still around, but they were bigger in the '70s. There was this glam rock band in the '70s called Sparks, and they had an album called Kimono My House, and that's one of my favorite albums of all time. And so we took inspiration from that album.
Nice. You're always good for a good pun, if nothing else, too. So interesting. So you're who were your inspirations, other inspirations, I guess, as from the musical side? Like, what was 6-year-old Joshua Hatton that wanted to be a rock star into?
Yeah, so actually for my 6th birthday, my uncle used to own a record store. I live in Connecticut, and he owned a record store in New Haven, called Rhymes Records. Partial owner, not full owner. Anyway, not that that matters. Anyway, on
Now I'm
my
not interested.
wait, if he was a full owner, then I'm interested.
No, hell with that. Yeah.
he for my 6th birthday, he had gotten me the first Ramones album. So I turned 6 in 1979. So I got the first Ramones album, and then he got me Black Sabbath Paranoid. And so that's little Joshua at age 6. And then he just got me into, all sorts of things like the Sex Pistols and Subhumans, and
At
and
six?
no, it's probably closer to 8. Probably
Okay.
closer to 8.
Really, Sex
And then
Pistols is for 8-year-olds, not 6-year-olds.
exactly, right, because he has to wait. And then my father is a folk music fanatic, and my grandparents love show tunes, and my mother loves acid rock. And so like I listen to all. There's not a music that I don't love right now, and I'll listen to it all, with
Yeah.
the exception of bubblegum country. I think is pure
Mm,
garbage.
yeah, understood. That's yeah. That's I mean the sense I get from most. I dabble in guitar and I was never really at the point where I was like this is going to be my career. But any of the musicians that I talked to that were really really serious or just even serious as a hobby, and to some degree I think this is true about whiskey too. It's like there's not a category that you can rule out altogether
No.
except bubblegum country. You're right. But
Except bubblegum country. I mean, that's like the Loch Do of whiskey, I think. But yeah, I can go from listening to Slayer to popping on Les Mis, and I'm just singing along the whole time, and I'm just loving it. It's just different music for different moods, and you're right, whiskey is the same way. Whiskey is very much a mood driven drink, so it's there are correlations there for sure.
yeah. I there was an interesting thing I remember hearing you talk about on the show where you were saying with the shutdown and everything, with you being inside, Springbank is one of your favorite, if not your favorite, distilleries, as I understand.
Hmm.
But you were saying you were finding it harder to drink Springbank,
Completely, yeah.
and I'm curious about that a little bit. I've actually asked a couple other people the same thing, and no one else has given me the like. Oh yes, I totally get that. So I'm curious where that's coming from exactly.
uh the thing with Springbank is it's very much, in my opinion, it is the contemplative whiskey. there aren't there aren't many, if any, Springbanks that I can think of that are just easygoing whiskeys that you just pour in your glass and say, ah, that's good, I don't have to think. Like, Springbank is so good that it's challenging your palate all the freaking time. And I've just gotten to a point where so first off, I'm drinking far less than I normally do. I've just, for a long time, it's funny, the thing I've started saying lately is I only drink when I work. Um,
I can understand that.
but it's during this time when we're all kind of shut in and stressed out, and the last thing that I want to do is use my brain any more than I have to. And if I'm going to drink a whiskey, it just needs to be a really good, straightforward, easy drinker. And so I find myself drinking a bit more bourbon these days, or drinking a bit more sort of like just younger bourbon, cask, whatever.
Like Irish whiskeys you're getting into more, or that's John L.
No.
Sullivan's for me was my just like easy $25 pour. Don't think about
Okay.
it.
Okay.
Blows away half the other Irish stuff, I think, too. But yeah, but everyone has to have that whiskey too. It's like, I mean, there is, I don't know how much you can see, but your
Oh yeah.
Campbelltown from like here to here or
Yeah.
so.
Yep.
And it's so I'm into it too, but I need other stuff. It's like you can't listen to just Mozart all day long, or you go a little crazy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's do you have like a guilty pleasure drink? I love we're talking to Simon Brooking in the Drammers Club, a whiskey club with you're also a member of, and I've done a couple events for, which has been really cool. And someone asked him a great question, which was just what do you drink? What's your guilty pleasure kind of thing? And for him,
Mm.
he's drinking Lafroig all day, which for anyone who doesn't know is the biggest punch in the face of peat, like swamp thing craziness that you could put in your mouth.
Yep.
And so his answer was, when I'm not drinking that, I'm drinking rosé, because it's the complete opposite. Do you find yourself, when you're drinking for enjoyment, not drinking stuff that's cask strength because that's what you're bottling most of the time? And I know you're a huge fan of it, or do you have a particular weird rosé type guilty pleasure?
Um, I don't think I have a single, like, I love rosé, but I don't call that a guilty pleasure. I think it's just a fine drinking wine that's perfect for summertime, and I don't feel guilty about that.
That's fair.
Um,
You just have less shame than he does, I
I
guess.
just have less shame, you
Yeah.
know? I think, especially as it's getting warmer now, I'm a big sherry drinker.
Mm.
And so as it's getting warmer, I find myself pouring some nice Fino or Manzanilla sherries. They're just lighter, a bit brighter, floral. They've just been really nice. In the wintertime, I'll go for like a Palo Cortado or an Oloroso, a heavier, more oak influenced sherry. And I like that because, especially with the Oloroso and Palo Cortado, I like that because there are echoes of things that I love in whiskey in sherry, but I'm also drinking something that's only, anywhere between, say, 15 to 20% alcohol. So I can drink a bit more of it, and I can drink it with a bit more ease and more conversationally than just sitting down with a cask strength whiskey. Yeah.
Well, I mean, sherry is such an interesting category right now too, because not that many people are drinking it. It's starting to be some more of the kind of, I've talked to a handful of whiskey nerds that are really into it. I couldn't
Mm.
even myself get into sherry until someone finally paired a good Fino sherry with a good olive. And I'm not even a huge olive
Oh,
fan, but just trying that, I was like, I get it now.
yeah.
What? Why do you think people are not that into sherry? And do you think it's going to be something that is kind of the next hip thing, or is it just going to be something that the nerds can get into, and hopefully the price stays as low as it is and
Well,
doesn't
that's
turn
that's
into
the
whiskey?
that's the beautiful thing about sherry right now is it can be so great, and you can get, like, I have a bottle of 1962 Pedro Jimenez sherry that was bottled in 2015 or 2016, and I think maybe I paid $100 for it. Like, if that were a whiskey, I'd be taking money from my kids' college
Yeah,
fund,
like
just
add two zeros.
right. Yeah,
And
exactly. Um, so from a price standpoint, there's low barrier to entry if you're curious about it. Why people aren't into it anymore? I think unfortunately in the 70s and in the 80s it became, somehow, for whatever reason, it transformed into grandma's drink, and it is so not grandma's drink. I think in part it has to do with Harvey's Bristol Cream, which I think is a perfectly fine little sherry. The word cream has nothing to do with it. There's no cream in the sherry. It's
it is
just a
not Bailey's
marketing.
sherry.
It's
Yeah,
not Bailey's. But that became a big brand that was marketed toward, the octogenarians of the world. And it became just sort of grandma's drink. But there's such a massive world of flavor discovery in sherry that I hope people start exploring a bit more. And prices are so good right now that you can explore, like, you can get a good bottle of Oloroso sherry for maybe $12, and that will last you a long time. And Oloroso sherry doesn't typically go, like, if you open up a bottle of red, that will go bad in a couple of weeks because you're meant to drink it all. And sherry, will stay for a good long while, so long as it's been oxidized, like Oloroso or Montiato, Palo Cortado, you know, those will stay around for a while.
sure. And I mean, I think anyone who's into Scotch in particular kind of owes it to themselves to explore sherry a little bit more, because there's so much. I mean, you're already getting a piece of it, and it just makes sense, I
Mm.
think, to see where that's actually coming from. Like, really informs once I, tried a pheno, and you kind of see how much lighter it is and how that would probably let a little bit more of the whiskey through than something like if you're putting it in first fill Oloroso and you actually taste Oloroso,
Exactly.
yeah, you're really getting to
You
see where it comes from.
you make those connections, which is great. And worst comes to worst, if you buy those sherries and you don't see the connections, or you end up not liking sherry, you could always cook with it, or you can make cocktails with it. It is such a diverse um, drink. You can do so many things with it. So I urge anybody, look for a sherry. Go to Roma,
We
buy
have
a
a
bottle of
couple. We
sherry
need
from
more,
Roma.
but yeah. It's yeah. I mean, it's such a tricky thing because you don't go through it all that quickly.
Mm.
Because there's a handful of people that get into it, but it's yeah. I would love to see that market start to tick up a bit, and I think it will. Have you had much for Madeira? The Cercial Madeira in particular, I think, is a really nice gateway.
Hmm.
If you can't deal with the full on sherry thing right away, that you're getting a little bit more sweetness.
Yeah, that one of the most lovely things about Madeira is during the maturation process. Part of what they do is they increase the ambient heat around the casks, because they kind of want the wine to cook a little bit. Because what they found, historically speaking, the way it all worked is, back when there were just naval ships all around, or ships bringing product from one place to the next, they would pick up the wine from Madeira, then they would from the Madeira Islands, part of Portugal, and then they would go south past the equator to go around and to where their final destination was. And when they got into that heat and then out of that heat, they found that that wine took on these tropical fruity notes. And so and obviously that's not how Madeira travels anymore. Like, that's just not what happens. But they figured that out years and years and years ago, that does this wine only taste good when we put it on a boat and go past the equator and so on. And so they figured that out, and they changed how they mature Madeira, and now you still get those tropical fruity notes, but they have to sort of artificially increase the heat when they're maturing
Yeah,
the wine.
it's really really neat stuff. And for me, kind of, I got into a bit of a sweet tooth, so I was kind of into port, and then that was getting a little sweet
Hmm.
in general, and you're not maybe drinking it as much in the summertime either. But the first time someone gave me a Cercial Madeira, and it was actually the same person that gave me the olive and the sherry,
Yeah.
I was done. That was like, this
Yeah.
is, and
Right.
some of them, go ahead, yeah.
No, it's just they're gorgeous. They're great wines, and I see what you're saying too. They're you do with some of them, you have to have a bit of a sweet tooth, especially for port and Madeira. Sherry, much less. Other than PX, sherry is not so sweet. But if you have a sweet tooth, those Madeiras and ports can be just what the doctor ordered.
And that the Cercial just hits this sweet spot where you're getting a little bit of the savory thing that you get from sherry,
Hmm.
and you're getting the sweet thing from port. So it's, yeah, that's been fun. Has Single Cast Nation done much in Madeira? I feel like I've not seen a ton.
We have not bottled a whiskey that was matured in Madeira. We've done an Aran that was finished for 4 years in Pinot Noir.
Hmm,
We've done plenty of sherry cask matured ones. We've done a Sauterne cask for an English whiskey company that we did.
that would be awesome.
Bourbon cask, of course.
This is
But
part
yeah,
of
no
my
Madeira.
Part of my huge regret is that I just met you like last year or so and started paying attention to Single Cast Nation. So I'm now going through the backlog, like, I want to try this 5-year-old Lafroig and all of this crazy. You did an Imperial too, which I think I just missed. I was like just getting ready to order stuff, and the Imperial had sold out.
Sold
Um,
out.
this is another one of your big, one of your
I,
favorite distilleries, I guess, that you get a lot of.
yeah, Imperial is yeah, I was just looking for the Single Cast Nation one.
Hmm.
Um so Springbank and Imperial are sort of neck and neck for my favorite distilleries. I only collect whiskey from one distillery, and that's Imperial, but it's difficult because I want to drink all the Imperial. And so I'll always buy two of any Imperial that I find so that I can have one and collect one.
Hmm.
Um, but unfortunately, that distillery was demolished in 2010, I think, or 2012, one of the two. But like Springbank, it has such a very unique flavor profile that I think is unmistakable.
Hmm.
I'm not sure it's as contemplative a whiskey as Springbank is, but it definitely has that. You put it in your glass, and you're like, that's an Imperial, just like you would. Oh, that's a Springbank, and that's one of the things that I just absolutely love about the distillery.
Hmm. Was that? I'm kind of curious because I feel like you sort of missed the boat a little bit, as I understand, on being able to bottle a Springbank unless one turns up somewhere because they can't keep it on the shelves basically, so they're not
Yeah.
selling off casks. Um, so the Imperial, I feel like if I was in that situation, like let's say I own an independent bottler and they're like, here's this Springbank, I think the hardest thing in the world for me would be to taste it with any sort of without coloring my palate on the fact that I
Oh,
want to buy a Springbank cask. So I'm
yeah.
curious how you went about, like when you first heard about getting that Imperial, how you got to taste it, if you had any second thoughts, or had you had other ones that were just like, I really want this, but it's no good.
Um, so let me think back to that. So when we tasted that sample, it was there were two other samples along with it. So there was this 23-year-old that we bottled, I think a 21-year-old, and then maybe a 24-year-old. And all three were good, but the 23-year-old just really stood out. Um,
So you got to try next
yeah,
to a couple others at least.
yeah, we got to try them, and I it's a really interesting question. I'm trying to think. There was one of them in particular that was like, oh, great nose, great palate, but the finish was just off. Like it just went, choom, it just dropped. It was so short and abrupt. And I think if that was the only cask we were offered, we'd still say no to it.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because part of us believes, well, there will probably be more. Because if we saw one, chances are we're going to see another one from somewhere else. But first and foremost, I mean, we're two guys that own an independent bottling company. And the only way we've been successful is to stay true to ourselves, stay true to our palates, bottle for what we like. And if we don't stay true to that, then we lose a reputation. And that's all an independent bottler has is its reputation. And if we touch that, then people won't trust us anymore. And so we won't just say yes to something because of the rarity of it. And we've said no to things that were really rare, but the price wasn't right. And so that's the other thing. Like it also has to be like a decent priced whiskey. We've had plenty of Springbanks cross our desk, and we've tasted some that have been great. We've tasted some that have been okay. But each and every one of them, the price has been like just completely prohibitive. There's no way we're going to charge $500 for a bottle of 25-year-old Springbank. It's just a silly price that I just wouldn't want to charge.
Yeah. It's kind of neat because I think, I mean, you could sell it. I'm sure you could sell it. Like if you bottled a $500 Springbank, especially at this point that you're at. You guys sold out of the 30-year-old Bowmore, and before I even realized it was on sale. Even this last really surprised me. There was a 2-year-old Milk and Honey that sold out in
Yeah.
about the same amount of time. And it seems like that's the direction you're going, where you kind of have this reputation now where a lot of people do just trust what you're selling. And you have a very, very loyal following at this point. What do you think? I mean, other than just, I think anyone can, not anyone, but most people can bottle good whiskey. What do you think you guys did that got you such a loyal following?
I don't. That's a that's a deep question.
Mm.
Um, I don't know. I don't think you're wrong in saying that anyone can bottle good whiskey. I mean, there's no doubt about it. There's shops all around the country that do phenomenal, you know, barrel picks from, Buffalo Trace or Blanton's or, what have you, Wild Turkey, and they're all really good. Um, are ours better? I don't know. I think it's a matter of people's taste, right? You know, I think in the end, people discover independent bottlers in an unusual way. If you are someone who started your whiskey journey, typically you're starting it because someone said, "Hey, try this Macallan, try this Glenmorangie, try this, insert big name here." You fall in love, and then you find another distillery that you fall in love with. Maybe it's Lafroig, or maybe it's, Lagavulin or something like that. As you start going deeper, then you hear about independently bottled whiskey. And when you first find out about independent bottlers, you don't go there and say, "I'm going to buy anything from them." You go there and say, "What are the whiskeys that I love?" I was introduced to Macallan. I had Glenmorangie, and now I like Lafroig. So you're going to buy our Lafroig, and then you find out, oh, wait, there's also Cadenheads and Gordon MacPhail. Ooh, they have a Lafroig too. And so they start following independent bottlers, not through the lens of the bottler, but through the lens of the distillery that they love. And the idea is that once they discover that independent bottler, and maybe they buy one or two bottlings from them, from the distillery they love, maybe, and they liked both those bottlings, now they have a little bit of faith that, well, I've heard about this Bal Blair distillery. Let me try their Bal Blair, right? And then they start discovering, oh, I like that Bal Blair. Oh, I heard about Old Pulteney. Let me try that. And so they discover an independent bottler first through the distillery that they love, and then they start developing a loyalty to one or two or three independent bottlers and say, I'll always get a bottling from them. And that's kind of how I fell into it. That's like Cadenheads. I will buy any Cadenhead sight unseen because I know it's going to be good, so
Is
long as I
that
can afford it.
is that the same as Cadenheads?
So you can pronounce it Cadenheads or Cadenheads. Jason pronounces it Cadenheads. I pronounce it Cadenheads.
Interesting.
Even at Cadenheads, you have people pronouncing it Cadenheads and
Okay.
Cadenheads, and yeah.
I
So
had always heard that back and forth, and then I went to the Edinburgh one, and I was like, everyone here says Cadenheads, but I haven't been to Campbelltown, so I can't. I'm not an expert.
you're fine either way.
Nice.
Um,
What do you remember? What the? Or sorry, if you had another point you were going to make.
no, so the that I was just sort of taking a long time getting to was that I think that's how people discovered us. Is that they tried one or two of our bottlings because we bottled a Lafroig, right? That 5-year-old, or we bottled an Aaron, or what have you, and people became loyal to our brand, and the people just became mini brand ambassadors. Like, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing how passionate and loyal our customers and we call them nation members. What are, how loyal they are, because they go around to anyone and everyone saying, "Have you tried the Single Cask Nation? Insert whiskey here." And so maybe we've gotten as big as we are just because of our members and,
Sure.
and our customers.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. Anyone who I talk to who has had any history with it won't shut up about it, basically. So, and then I mean, you have this great platform of the website or of the podcast too. You were doing the whiskey festivals for a while as well, so that
Yeah.
the company was kind of always in the back of my head. Like, I had heard about you guys, I knew about the Whiskey Jubilee bottlings, and had
Mhm.
never like jump. I mean, I'm coming from Pennsylvania too, so we were under the tyranny of the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board, which
Oh,
did not
jeez.
bring any of that in. So
Sorry to hear that.
happy to be in New York now. But I mean, for me, it was really, I mean, meeting you at a portfolio tasting and getting to try this stuff firsthand certainly helped. But it wasn't until I started listening to these episodes and hearing your guys' opinions about everything, which you are not shy about, and kind of being like, oh, I agree with most of this, or you could just see a personality coming through it.
Yeah.
And I think that comes through in most of these bottles. There was an interview that I heard you talking about with where I think the guy was trying to come up with the words, and he was saying something like, in some independent bottlers I can see a similar I think he said a similar note, and you had kind of, I think, better language for it, where you said like it's more, and you may remember this better than me, but it's more like you can see kind of a mind at work, or you can see a particular someone's palate coming through.
Yeah, that's very much it. When you're tasting whiskey from an independent bottler, regardless of who it is, if that independent bottler is doing their job right, then they're bottling whiskey that they appreciate and love and want to share. Um, and I would say most independent bottlers do fall into that. You know, there's no massive corporation independent bottler. They
Hmm,
tend to be smaller companies.
that's a good point.
Um, and so when you taste whiskey from Cadden Heads, you know, you're tasting that tasting panel's palate and getting an understanding of whiskeys that they think are good enough to go in a bottle with the Cadden Heads name,
Sure.
right? They're also thinking about reputation. So you get to taste what other people like. And so that brings me back to, you know, your initial question is, there could be a whole host of people who've tasted single cask nation whiskeys and said, you know what, I really don't like that. And that's perfectly fine. It just means that my palate and Jason's palate doesn't line up with theirs. It doesn't mean that their palate is wrong or that our whiskeys are bad. It just means that we're not in sync. And that's perfectly fine. If you think at any given time, and we're talking about Scotch whiskey specifically here, at any given time, there's around 20 to 22 million casks of whiskey sloshing around in Scotland. If they don't like one of our bottlings, that's fine. They'll like someone else's, and I'm okay with that.
There's plenty out there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's plenty
Well,
out there.
and I think it's a good point too. It's like it would be the most boring thing in the world if all you tried to do is make something that everyone would like. And that's in any capacity, that's almost a recipe for disaster, I think, whether
And
it's
that's why
music or
we
anything.
right, and that's why we've said from the beginning we have to, like, baseline. We have to bottle stuff that we would want to drink and just stick to those guns. And so long as we do that, our audience will find us.
If nothing else, that's one of the biggest perks of the job, I guess. Is like you're
It's
bottling
okay.
it, you get a bottle here and there.
That's okay.
um, so I'm kind of curious. I mean, I think it's really interesting what you guys are doing, and I don't know how much the general public has a sense of how important the choices are for an independent bottling, and the actual work that goes into having an independent bottling company, because you're not producing the whiskey itself. And I
Mm.
certainly have a tremendous amount of respect for anyone who's doing this. But are there times or days, or do you ever think like, I wish I had a still and I was producing my own stuff and I could say this is, Triple J whiskey? Joshua and Jess and Jace are like, what, have you ever thought about that, or is that just way too complicated and you don't want to get into that side?
Yeah, Jason and I thought about it for a little while, and we quickly stopped thinking about it, because we had enough friends, you know, within the industry who've started their own, you know, craft distillery here in the U.S. and the common theme was, you know, the best way to make $1 million with a distillery is to spend $5 million. right? It's just you're always chasing your tail, and it takes forever to get return on investment. And actually, it wasn't even that so much that scared us away. It was more. It was more. I think that I would just get bored of what we were producing. Like you mentioned it before. Someone asked Simon Brooking, when you're not drinking Lafroig, what are you drinking? Like, Lafroig makes amazing whiskey that I drink plenty of, and there's no refuting it. Like, they just make amazing whiskey. But what's so great about owning an independent bottling company, in my opinion, is there's a Lafroig we did, there's a Canvas we did, there's a couple Altmore, some Klein Leash, some Glen Murray's, like some Wild Turkey, some English whiskey. Like, there's no end to the flavors that we can discover through our bottlings, where I think a distillery, you definitely, you'd hit a point where there's only so much flavor you could produce, right? Because you have a spirit character, and casks can only do so much. And yeah, maybe you could play with peated barley if you wanted. And if you really wanted, maybe you could do rye and single malt. Like, you could do that, but still, I think I'd rather bottle whiskey from other distilleries and help spread the word about these other distilleries that, like, people don't know Imperial. I want to share that. I want people to discover that. I want people to discover Milk and Honey and Glen Talkers and all these distilleries that, you may not have heard of, but they make beautiful stuff. So I like that. I like introducing people to new things.
Yeah. It's almost you're as much the and I don't know if this is simplifying it too much, but you're almost as much the disc jockey as you are the musician for this kind of thing. Like, you're
I went
just
to school for broadcasting.
did you?
This
Okay.
all makes sense now.
It's all coming together. That makes okay, and the podcast is making more sense now too. So
Uh-huh.
it's all coming together. That's funny. So yeah, I mean, I remember kind of feeling a very similar thing myself too when I started getting into the industry after working at a large computer store for a while after film school, like finding my way. And I found there was a distillery in Pittsburgh that was producing whiskey. And it was an amazing experience. And in Pittsburgh, there's only so many things you can do in whiskey. And Wiggle probably had 32 SKUs at any given point, which was amazing.
That's a
And
lot of SKUs.
it's a lot for this. I mean, it was
Yeah.
absinthe, it was this, and it was that. And
Oh, I see. Yeah.
I was still, but I mean, even under whiskey, there was probably 20 SKUs at any point. Like, but I still remember being thrilled, and I loved it there. But I was thrilled when I could come to a store in New York and pick the bottles that I wanted and be able to talk about Springbank and Lafroig and E.H. Taylor and rums and like all this other kind of. There's so much out there that if you're super into this and you're nerdy about it, would almost be limiting to have your own place that could only make one style. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
I think if I wanted my own distillery, I'd purchase Rose Isle from Diageo, because they've got, I think, like 17 different stills there, and they're all
working
different shapes.
It's like a Japanese distillery almost, where they're trying to have everything in house kind of thing.
So they can produce like a plethora. I love using that word, a plethora of spirit types, and but I don't think Diageo are selling, at least not for the $50 bill I have in my wallet right now.
Right. I'm just imagining this podcast, or this talk, through the lens of your podcast, where you insert the Three Amigos section right there for what is a plethora.
Easy.
I won't copy your style.
What easy to guapo.
Why would you use that word if you do not know what it means? So speaking of kind of varied backgrounds that you said you went to school for broadcast, it was?
Yeah, broadcasting.
And then you were a musician and kind of thought that's what you were going to be when you grew up. I'm curious, both, I guess, actually in the whiskey industry too, but especially outside of the whiskey industry, are there any particular heroes of yours?
Outside of the whiskey industry, are there? Yeah. first and foremost, Gene Wilder is probably my biggest hero
Oh man, why?
ever.
I mean, I don't disagree, but why is that?
Um, I there's something about his comedy that has just this almost childlike innocence to it that I think is so special. And there's a kindness in his face,
Hmm.
and even in his jokes, his and believe me, I love jokes that tear people apart, especially if they tear me apart. I love self-deprecating humor, so I'm not against insulting kind of humor, but there's something so gentle about his humor and so unique. Um, and I just remember growing up as a kid, watching Gene Wilder movies with my mother, and that was some of the closest. And I'm close with my mother, but that was some of the closest connections we had when I was growing up. And I had an opportunity years before he passed away to meet him at a book signing,
Oh man.
and I was like late in the line, and he wasn't really talking to anybody. He was signing, you get your picture taken, you move on. And I finally got up to him, and I told him the story about watching his movies with my mom. And he put his pen down, and he stopped, and he just looked at me, and he said, "Thank you so much for saying that." And he wasn't looking at anybody. He wasn't really talking to anybody. It was just sign, thank you, move on. And he just took out time, and I'll never forget that. Gene Wilder has been my hero since I was a little kid, and I'm honored to say that I locked eyes with him and he spoke to me.
That's awesome. That's gonna make me start to cry. That's like the opposite of don't meet your heroes too. That's like he's exactly as nice as
He's
you would have hoped.
exactly as nice as I would have hoped.
That's amazing.
Frank Zappa is a big
Ooh.
hero of mine. I'm a big Zappa fan.
You're definitely following a can there be humor in whiskey kind of thing, I think. So I see that. I see that
yeah, exactly, right.
connection.
Um, uh, I don't know. It's a lot of music based
Hmm,
things. McCartney, Ray Davies of the
hmm.
Kinks. You know, Jello Biafra of the Dead Kennedys. Like
Ah,
it
nice.
just, yeah, yep.
Good stuff.
Usually outspoken people or overtly nice people.
Yeah.
Those are my heroes.
That's a pretty good range between Jello Biafra and Gene Wilder. You got
Right.
that's a good breath. Nice. What about in whiskey? I'm kind of curious. One about maybe, and I've heard so many people that you've interviewed on your podcast that are heroes
Mm.
of mine and clearly of
Mm.
yours too. I think. But I think that was when I first was like, oh, this guy's for real. When I was flipping through the podcast, and I think it was just after Dave Broom was on there, and I was like,
Yeah.
they're for real. Okay.
Yeah.
Got David, oh, Anthony Wills from Cohoma. Okay, this is working out. This is a good show.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I mean, kind of maybe some, if you can give one or two kind of like established heroes of like the old guard kind of thing. And then maybe people that are doing things in a new, interesting way, more up and coming that you really appreciate.
Yeah. Um, Gosh, that's a really good question. I think I have some writers that I really like that I don't. I used to read a lot, and now I don't have time. So the only thing that I read is comic books. But if I'm going to read a whiskey book, and like Hans Fringa, I think is a wonderful writer that brings a lovely voice to whiskey.
I don't know that
Um,
I've read anything that I know by name. What's the book or what are the books?
so he's got a bunch of books. His first book, I think it's his first book. I don't know if it's his first book, but anyway, one of my favorites is just called "The Road to Reality,"
Yeah.
and it just talks about his own journey into whiskey, which was just a really lovely, honest story.
Huh.
Right. I really liked it. So from a writing standpoint, I'd say Hansa Fringa, maybe Michael Jackson, of course, not Michael Jackson, but the beer writer, whiskey writer, Michael Jackson.
The first time I heard that
Um,
name, I was confused for like 5 minutes. I'm like, that guy gets around.
yeah,
Yeah.
you know, one of the things that, and I'll paraphrase here, but one of the things that I loved about Michael Jackson, and again, this gets back to my love of overtly nice people, is even when there was a whiskey or a beer he didn't like, he would always say something. He would always look for something nice to say about it, and he would tell people, always look for the nice things to say.
Hmm.
And I like that. And it doesn't mean that he was like sugarcoating it or trying to polish a turd, but these are producers that are working their ass off to create a good product. There has to be something in there. Let's figure out what that is. And I liked that approach to whiskey in beer reviewing.
And
Um,
I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially these days too, where it's like we're so spoiled in a lot of ways that we have all of these choices, and there's not
yeah.
much of it that's like undrinkable or even bad.
No, I mean nowadays the quality of whiskey has improved so much. And in the beer world too. I mean, it used to be that America made crap beer, and now we're leading the world in just phenomenal craft beers. Just all different styles and like different ABVs and grains. Like, there's so much innovation happening there, which is great, and so much, like, whiskey went through such a bad period of hit or miss, mostly miss whiskeys, and they figured out, okay, let's figure out a wood management program to make sure that our whiskeys are consistently good, and let's, just all these little things to ensure that now in 2020 you can go to any whiskey shelf and you'll find something good on there because they're all making damn good stuff.
Yeah, it's really more about. I mean, from a buyer standpoint, for me, I feel like my job is trying to pick out the most excellent whiskeys from the good whiskeys. Like it's
Right, right,
yeah.
yeah.
Neat. So I want to make sure we spend a little bit of time talking about the becoming a keeper of the Quake. Because I think if that ever happened to me, I would just introduce myself that way. Like wear the thing around my neck and just, hi, I'm Anthony Levinson. I am a keeper of the Quake. What the hell is that? Well, let me explain it to you. And I think you have it at the end of your email for some things.
Yeah.
I think it might be part of your signature, but I don't hear you talk about it a ton either.
No.
And which is probably reasonable, just for humility's sake, I guess. But I'm
Well,
curious how
yeah.
that happened, what the deal, because a lot of people probably don't know what that is even.
Yeah. So I think, so first off, there's only about 2,500 keepers of the Quake. Since its inception in the 80s, about 33, 34 years ago, something like that. And I would say, of any of the keepers, and there are also masters of the Quake, but only like a handful of them. There are not a lot. I think you'd find the same, that none of them are touting it. It is very much a thing that is given to you as an honor, and you accept it and you move on. And if it's brought up, then you can talk about it. And if people know what it is and they say, "Oh wow, you're a keeper," you say yeah, and you just kind of move on, and that and that's it. It's just not really talked about so much. So it started, oh geez, yeah, about 33, 34 years ago. I don't have the exact date off the top of my head, but it was an organization put together by the major Scotch whiskey companies as something to honor those within the industry that have made it their life's work to forward the or made it their life's work for the advancement of Scotch whiskey around the world, whether that's selling whiskey or writing about whiskey or producing whiskey, specifically, again, single malts, not single malt, but Scotch whiskey. That's an honor that you could receive. And so the way that it goes, Um, First off, you have to be in the industry at least 7 years. And the person who nominates you as a keeper has to be a keeper, him or herself. And not only do they have to be a keeper, but they will have had to have been a keeper for 5 years. So that means they had to be at least a keeper for 12 years before they nominate you.
Hmm.
You get the nomination, and you have to have someone second that nomination. And so you have to have another person that's been a keeper for 12 years
So you have to suck up to at least two people.
you have to suck up to two people at least. I did 7. No. um, and then you have basically a resume to submit. You have to fill out what you've done and in all of your achievements, and then that is presented to a board of masters of the Quake and the Grand Master of the Quake, and they vote up or they vote down.
Hmm.
And I was voted up, obviously, but I was voted a yes in 2017 and was finally made a keeper in 2019.
Hmm.
So they have 2 banquets a year where 45 people per banquet are inducted. And it just takes time. I have a friend who was inducted. He was given the yes 10 years before he ever got into a banquet. It just takes time. And you can imagine there's 2,500 keepers of the Quake around the world, but in the Scotch whiskey industry, and that includes shop owners,
Hmm.
right? There are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, just, bartenders, you name it. So I'm incredibly honored and humbled to have been made a keeper. And yes, I don't talk about it a lot. If people want to talk about it, I'm more than happy to, but I just kind of, it's a for me thing. And that's it, really.
So do you know what exactly it was? Like, I'm curious. I mean, because you got it, and Jason did not. And is he salty about that?
Of course he's salty. He's a Scotsman. The American got it before the Scotsman did.
Right.
Um, um,
I mean, was it combined with you also working at Impex and everything that you kind of brought on with that, or just
I'll
your
tell
winning
you,
smile?
it's probably the winning smile. I
Yeah.
didn't even need braces for this.
Um,
No. I'll tell you, this is the one point where I'll say, let's finish this conversation afterwards.
sure. No, good,
Yeah.
good. Yeah. So, and just so people know, on a less controversial note, and I think I know, but what the hell is a quake?
Oh, right. So a quake is. Do I have one up here? Shit, I do not. I mean, heck, sorry, I didn't mean to swear.
Yeah.
So a quake. Oh, you know what? This isn't a quake, but it gets close. Oh, crap. Jeez Louise. Let's try this again. So imagine something about this size, maybe a little bigger, and it has 2 little handles on the end, and you sort of hold it like this. Sorry, I'm not talking directly in the mic. And it was meant to be a communal thing. So if you're having a gathering of close friends or a whiskey society, or especially when you're doing like a Burns night dinner, you fill this silver shallow goblet with whiskey, and you take a sip and you just pass it around, and everybody takes from it. And it's this communal Scottish drinking vessel.
Hmm. Not COVID approved. I'm taking it then.
Definitely not COVID approved.
I may have to rework the next ceremony, however they do that.
Yeah. So actually, I was meant to be, now that I'm a keeper, I can go to any of the banquets that I want, and I was meant to go to the April banquet, and unfortunately got canceled. So that was supposed to be April 5th or 6th. And there you go. Didn't work.
I was terribly jealous too, because I was supposed to go to what is it called? This the Star Wars Disneyland later, and I saw you got to go like right before
Yes.
everything shut down. I made one more trip into Scotland, which I was thrilled for, which I think we like just missed each other at the airport
Oh,
almost kind of thing.
yeah, I think so.
Um,
Yeah.
but you got to go to frickin' Galaxy's Edge, and I will never be okay with not going.
Well,
So
the last thing I'm going to do is rub it in your face and tell you how it was probably the best experience I've ever had. I won't do that.
no, you're a big man.
I'm trying to slim down, but it's not working so well. Oh,
um,
that kind of big man. Never mind.
yeah,
Okay.
you know, yeah. Nice. So, I had one more, and then we definitely want to get into some more specific kind of product stuff here in a minute too. But there's something I had right on the tip of my brain that did not stay with me. Uh, so I'm always curious. So how old were you, if you don't mind my asking, when you started Single Cast Nation?
Oh, you're making me do math here. When we were officially incorporated, I was 38.
38. Okay. So yeah, so you had basically a whole
37.
other okay. So you had kind of a
37
whole
going
other
on 38.
career.
Yeah.
I'm curious, and maybe at a couple points, any advice that you would have given yourself, let's say when you were starting Single Cast Nation, based on what you know now, or even when you were starting your career in general?
Hmm. Well, from where I am now, I think the advice that I would give to my younger self is don't be scared of buying lesser casks of whiskey because you need to be creating a re-racking program. The interesting thing that we found out in the not distant past is that the majority of whiskey being offered to you is just not the best stuff. I mean that we've known from the get go. Our rejection rate is massive. Um, but there are certain casks of whiskey that we've passed on because we said, you know what, it's doing one really good thing, and I can see the potential, but it would have to go into another cask. Like it'd have to be finished, or it should spend more time in that cask, and we would just say no to it,
Hmm.
and then move on and only pick the casks that we want to bottle here and now. Meanwhile, what we should have been doing from the very beginning was also buy some of those lesser casks that we saw had promise and created a re-racking or a finishing program where, maybe it's an ex-bourbon cask whiskey that was just the wood isn't doing a lot, and let's put it into a new charred oak cask, to a fresh bourbon cask, and breathe new life into that whiskey. Or maybe it was from a first fill cask, but it was sort of a one trick pony. Let's put that into sherry and see what happens. And I think early on we took this stance of the whiskey has to be good from a single cask and a single cask only. And finishes here and there are okay. In fact, we launched with a finish. Our first Aaron was 8 years in bourbon, 4 years in Pinot Noir, but
Hmm.
we didn't do the 4 years finishing in Pinot Noir. It was just that's how we got it.
So has everything up to this point been, you're not doing any re-racking or anything like that yourself? You're just taking the whiskey as you get it, it gets bottled, and
Uh,
that's what
we,
you
we,
release.
with one exception, and that was a 28-year-old canvas we did, where it was a really nice cask of 28-year-old grain whiskey, but it was just doing one thing. But it was so inexpensive that we decided to spend a little money on a fresh muscatel sherry cask and put the whiskey in there.
Hmm.
And 6 months later, it just became like liquid strawberries and nut milk, and just like it was wonderful then.
Hmm.
Um, but I think we'd be in a better. Not that we're in a bad position now. We're doing fine, but I think that we could have expanded into other markets sooner rather than later if we had created a re-racking and finishing program early on.
I mean,
Yeah.
and this is kind of it's from an outsider, this seems like the biggest issue that you're running up against now is the you've kind of gotten the hug of death from the community almost, where it's like your stuff is popular enough with at least as many people as our numbers of bottles that are produced from a single cask. So this stuff is selling out very quick. As most of the time, if you go to your website, you don't see bottles for sale. As a retailer, I'll look at the distributor, and I think we just grabbed the last couple bottles of the rum that you got, the 18-year-old rum, but
Oh,
a lot
yeah.
of the stuff goes quickly. So it's I mean, I think the new retail outturn, the pre-sale sold everything that was brought in. I don't know whether there'll be more, but right? I mean, do you think your biggest problem right now is that it's hard to keep whiskey on your virtual shelf kind of thing because you go through it too quickly, or is that even a problem?
It is definitely a problem, and we're looking to change that. You know, either by looking at more sherry butts or looking to do more double cask nation releases, and we've done a couple of those. Like we married a couple of Glenfarclas casks together to do that, and a couple Kregeliki casks, and we've done that. I wouldn't say that that's like the biggest obstacle for us. I mean, really, right now, I think the biggest obstacle is we don't have enough whiskey, period, whether it's for our online bottlings or for the retail, for the growth that we need to see. And it's kind of difficult now because stocks are tight. You know, we're looking around and we're not seeing a lot of good age stock. We're seeing 9 to 12-year-old stuff that I'm sure is good, but we're not seeing the range of stuff that we used to see, at least in the past few months. And so this is why, I'm kind of kicking myself. There's so many things that we said no to that would, like a year and a half ago, that would be amazing now if only we had said yes to it then. And so,
Yeah, I think you had
so
a whole episode where you were just reminiscing of like, why did we say no to that Macallan and like this,
yeah,
that, and the other.
25-year-old Macallan. And I think the biggest rub would have been that we would have charged like $280 for it. For a 25-year-old Macallan, think about that now.
Oh yeah,
And it's just that's a silly thought process to have had.
yeah.
But
If
there you
anyone's
go.
wondering, I mean, a 25-year-old Macallan independent bottling now, if it was released, would be $2,000, maybe 4,000,
Probably.
depending. Like, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, Macallan's own 25 is what, $3,500, something like that.
it went up just a little bit. So yeah, you're right in there.
So yeah, so like a Gordon MacPhail Spey malt, which is all Macallan, 25 years, it would probably be $1,000, $1,200, somewhere around there.
Easy.
Some big
Yeah.
price.
Huh. Do you guys see and I don't know that you even have the space for that. You'd have to purchase a warehouse or something, but would you ever do something like take New Make and lay it down and give it a decade or two?
We're definitely going to be doing that. I won't mention any names, but we've signed agreements with one of the largest whiskey companies in Scotland that owns several distilleries, and we're looking at buying aged stock as well as laying down new make. And the great thing about laying down our own stock is that we have control over the wood that it goes in, and that's going to be important to us.
Nice. That's when you can get that Madeira barrel in there for me.
Right? Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. Nice. Cool. Well, I think that my last question in kind of the interview section here. It's an interesting thing, I think, especially like talking about the broadcast background that you have and kind of wanting to be a rock star when you were a kid, because I think you're at this interesting point where you meet strangers that know way more about you then they know
It's
about
kind of
some of their
funny.
own family members. I like all these weird little inside jokes, and that's, I mean, that's like, it's almost like being a rock star to some degree. I think where you don't get the big shows. There's probably less girls involved, but like, I mean, I
Which is saving my marriage, to be honest.
right, no, that's probably for the best. Yeah. But I mean, I almost do you get any sort of like, does 6-year-old Joshua Hatton get any sort of gratification out of that?
I definitely do, but I'm incredibly uncomfortable with it.
Hmm.
It just because, I mean, because for me, this is all just, it's just whiskey. But there is something to be said for, when when Jason and I looked to create this podcast, we said we wanted it to just be the conversations that we were always having, um, just recorded. And that means he's talking about his family, my family. We're sharing stories, and those are some of my. And the reason why we chose to do that is some of my favorite podcasts is you get to know the podcaster, and there's something really nice about getting to know a bit about them. And so it is kind of weird. Like Jason and I were in Ardbeg in 2017. Was it 2017? Maybe it was 2018. And we were joking about something, and we were laughing, and someone came up to us and said, "Are you Joshua and Jason?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I recognize your laugh from the podcast." So it's just like, it happens all the time, and it's fun and it's funny. It is also just kind of weird as well.
Yeah, I would imagine. Well, that's awesome. I mean, I don't think it's going to get any easier as you go forward because I mean, the podcast seems to be doing really, really well. Obviously, you're selling through bottles like crazy. So, yeah, I certainly appreciate you taking some time to have a long, more personal conversation with me. So
That's my
thank you.
pleasure. Yeah,
Nice.
thank you for having me. Seriously.
For sure.